Hi there, my name is Sarami and I am So Live. Usually I sew live in front of you and you can chat with me and ask me questions. And today I have a quick complete sew through of a couple of t-shirts that I recently drafted with you guys live on camera. And you can find those videos uploaded. They are live streams, but you can fast forward and pause, rewind, whatever you like. For the first one, we drafted a t-shirt from a Moneta dress. This was my Me Made May pledge. I really wanted a t-shirt that was going to fit me, and I knew the Moneta bodice to work really well. And then I took the prototype from that pattern, I made one, and then I created a video on how I was going to revise the fit. And then I added a few other versions. So today I'm making a couple of those versions. I'm making a scoop neck tee, which is just kind of a soft silhouette, semi-fitted scoop neck cap sleeve so that it is close fitting. And cover stitch hems, because my serger does do cover stitch, no neckband. And then the other version is more of a like regular old boxy t-shirt that we all have with graphics on them. And I'm gonna do it in a slightly more flattering silhouette, since I got to draft it for myself in a really nice hemp and cotton lycra blend. And it has a dropped shoulder, so that's more of a classic t-shirt. And it also has a neckband, and then I'm gonna do cover stitch hems on the sleeves and the body. So here we go. So I have my serger set up just as a, let's see, a 5-thread serger right now, 4-thread serger right now. So it does have the seam on it, and it will do all of the entire seam in one step. So it'll sew the seam, trim it, and finish it all at once. And first I'm going to do my shoulders. One of the tricks I really like about serging is that there's a definite right and wrong side to your serging as far as like aesthetically looking. And what I like to do is always put that right side on the front of whatever you're sewing, meaning not the back. And that way, when you go to sew the joining seams like sleeves and things like that, you can really tell what is the front and what is the back, and you know which direction to push your seam. So I'll illustrate that really very much better in a bit. So here we are, we're going to do our shoulders first. And my blade's a little bit acting funny lately. I only added 3/8 inch seams, so I'm only going to trim a little bit of 1/8 of an inch. So we're going to do both shoulders, and you can see my serging has a nicer side on one side than the other. It's subtle for anyone who hasn't sewn with a serger very much, but you kind of get the hang of it. And it's just a nice little trick. You don't have to do that, but just try and avoid using pins with your serger. If you don't have a serger and you want to make knits, you can for the most part. Just know that you're going to have to use a zigzag stitch to assemble your pieces together so that there is some stretch. And the zigzag doesn't need to be tight or, you know, close together. It can be a very gentle zigzag. You'll be surprised that it doesn't really show on the right side once it's sewn. All right, so I'm continuing with my side seams because I do set the sleeves in, and I'm sewing on the front side first, so I have my nice side of my serging stitching showing on the front. So I kind of get it going, and then I kind of line up everything and get my sewing legs under me, as I like to say. That way I have the least fiddly time sewing it, and I don't have to use pins, because using pins with your serger is always really dangerous for your serger. This is a nice soft cotton interlock. Kind of a classic feminine shape, for lack of a better way to describe it. All right, and so I'm continuing with keeping my stitching on the front rather than the back. I just kind of get it going, and then I line it all up. Get my sewing legs under me, as I like to say. I don't pull as I sew. It should all line up really well, even if you're using a store-bought pattern, you know. Only time you stretch knits as you sew them is when you're trying to add something like a cuff, you know, like to a sweatshirt. All right, so now we have all of our seams complete. So we have the right side of the stitching all consistently on the front. And now we're going to put our sleeves in. So first I'm going to do the underarm. And it's not really going to matter what side I put that stitching on the sleeve. This sleeve is symmetrical. It doesn't have a front and the back. And it also, I'm going to push my sleeve underarm seam the opposite direction of my side seam because I just like the less bulk under there. So when you get to a hem shape such as this, you're just going to have to be pretty careful. Just do your best because your blade sits in front of the needles a good ½ inch or more, and so the blade's getting there first, and you're going to turn the corner with the blade, yet the needles need to catch up. So it's just kind of one of those things. You just got to do the best you can. But you'll see as I rotate it, you know, kind of pivot it, it kind of keeps it all lined up. All right, so here we go. I tend to also try and sew certain things when I can, always the same direction. So since I started from the armhole side of the sleeve, I'm going to start on the armhole side on the other side. I obviously didn't do that on my side seams of my shirt because I was interested in keeping my stitching being on one side of the garment. All right, so now we have our sleeves. I'm going to turn them right side out, keep my shirt inside out. And this is one trick when you're using a serger so that all of your garment stays above the bed of the machine and you don't accidentally have your garment slipping underneath, and then that's when we have those really big oopsie daisy moments where we accidentally sew or cut our garment underneath. So I know that this is the front side of my stitching, so I'm going to push it towards the back. And then I'm going to push my underarm seam towards the front, and that's just to reduce the bulk at the side seam. I'm going to get it going, and then I'm going to arrange everything. Especially on these thicknesses, I really like to make sure I kind of got my sewing legs under me before I tear into it. So this sleeve fits perfectly. There's no easing, and that's really common in knits. You rarely ease a knit garment as far as the sleeve goes. It should match. There's no need to ease because you've got the benefit of the stretch of the knit. And so here I am at the shoulder, and see, I know that that goes towards the back because that's the right side of my stitching. And see, I didn't have to sit there and go, which one's the front and which one's the back? That's why I do that. My knit really wants to roll. And here's my tip. When you're cutting knits, especially ones that roll like that, if you can tell your knit's going to do that, don't cut it until right before you're going to sew it. You'll have a much easier time with it. When it rolls, it's kind of a pain. Double knits don't roll. But sometimes you don't know whether it's a double knit or a single knit, and you can't see it if you're ordering it online, right? They're still good knits, they're just fiddly. And it's good to know what it feels like when there's a wrinkle under your garment right here, so that you're not accidentally sewing, you know, your garment's not slipping under there with the blade. So when I get towards the beginning here, you can see, like, when you go on to knits and armholes, you kind of come in at an angle and then start straighten out as you go around. What I like to do is kind of straighten that out when I get there. I cut it and then I pull a little bit to kind of seal or cinch it, secure it. All right, so let's do our other armhole. I'm going to turn that sleeve right side out again, line it up in there. Push the front of the seam towards, push the seam towards the back. Push the sleeve seam towards the front. That way this is nice and flat right there. And once I get it going a little bit, now I can adjust everything. You don't really want to have a whole lot of notches in knitting either, because you know, just like with your sweater, a knit sweater, you wouldn't really cut into that, right? Because it could run, just like your nylons or pantyhose, things like that. Knits are the same way. You don't have a lot of notches in knit sewing because of that. Where's my front? There it is. It really wants to curl right there. I'm barely getting it flat before I sew it. And when I get to the beginning, I straighten it out. And then I cinch it. And then I try not to monkey around with that. Serging is not the most elegant way to finish things. All right, so let's see what our shirt looks like. I picked this print because I really love quail. You can see them right there. So not bad, right? So now we're going to do our cover stitch hems, and I will convert the machine for that. Okay, we're ready to hem our scoop neck tee, and we're going to use the cover stitch on my sewing machine. I had a bit of a false start, so you're going to see that I had to remove it and start over again. And I decided to go with a narrow width for my cover stitch, hoping that that kind of calms down the like bunching I was getting. And I also added a little ribbon to the back neck here, which I have temporarily pinned. So that might give me a little bit of trouble. It's a little bit thick, but I really want it at the back neck so I know where my back is. So you don't need to use a cover stitch if you don't have one. A zigzag works really great and almost works better than a cover stitch. It's far stretchier, and sometimes I use that too. I don't really want to set up my cover stitch or convert it or change the thread color, or maybe I'm gonna need to bounce back and forth too much between serging and cover stitch, so I just opt for the zigzag. So don't feel like you need a cover stitch. I just thought I'd demonstrate it because a lot of people are really curious about what it does. And it does provide a really stretchy hem. You'll see it on almost any t-shirt you own or something made of knit. It is the preferred hem choice for the bottom and the sleeves, and the neck. So I start on the back neck just behind the shoulder seam. So I have my shirt inside out, but I'm going to sew on the right side of the garment, because the funny thing about cover stitch is that you need to turn back your hem and sew from the right side. So it's going to feel a little weird. It definitely used to make me a little nervous about it, but it's honestly not that hard. You can see your edge or feel it through the top and you're going to be just fine, I promise. So I need to wiggle my work under there. There's no knife with a cover stitch, so you don't have to worry about cutting into your garment. You just kind of get it into position there. I have a 3/8 inch hem on the neckline. Because of the curve, you need kind of a narrower hem. So I'm going to start it off here behind the shoulder seam. This is the back. This is the front. And you can see my previous stitching there. Now it's going to be narrower. Unfortunately, I may have a little bit of the needle holes showing there. We'll see if putting my needles closer together calms it down. Yeah, not really. Sometimes you just got to live with what your machine gives you. So I don't stretch the neckline as I sew. You definitely don't want to do that. But I am double checking as I go. You know, I have it turned back. I don't want to get near these curves, pull it, and it goes do something kind of shallow right there. So I just try and make sure that I can maintain this 3/8 inch width around the entire perimeter of the neckline. Take your time. They don't take very long, so you might as well take your time. It's always your last few details that really make the garment look polished, isn't it? So here I get close to these little junctures here, and I'm going to straighten them out. Get rid of any threads or uneven edges, because they won't get caught in there. So you might as well just trim them now while it's easy, and you don't have to trim them afterward, and your scissors are so close to your stitching. My machine doesn't really like the uneven thicknesses of like seams, like shoulder seams and junctures and things like that. So when I get close to them, I sometimes kind of gently pull my shirt along to kind of give it a little oomph. Now here I'm coming to this funny little spot with my ribbon. But I want to hem over it. We'll probably hear it as it goes through. All right, and so here's my start. You can see, look, it got really thin right there width-wise. Let's just clean up this edge. So all those little threads just need to get trimmed off. And then as I approach it, I'm going to try and go right in the same grooves as when I started. You can see how the edge is coming along. Some of my edge is poking out below it. I could trim it off, but it's kind of dangerous to do that, get your scissors so close to the stitching. And honestly, you really can't tell from the outside. Here's a little bit of that bunching I was telling you about. It's something new my machine's been doing lately. All right, let's see here. Let's finish this off. Right in those grooves. There's no back stitch with a cover stitch. And then I'm going to lift my needles up, lift up my presser foot. I'm going to pull my work out as far as I can, and then I may have to sew a few stitches to let it release. But you can do that since it's a serger. You can't do that on a regular machine. And you have these little threads and you just trim them up. That's why I do a few extra stitches since there is no back stitch. But it's not the kind of stitch that just starts pulling out. All right, so here's our neckline. There's where the ribbon is. Not too bad right there. Like right here I had a really nice section right there. So it can look really nice. All right, let's do it on the sleeves. I'm gonna leave it inside out. Look at my junctures, see if their edges are lined up. Having a wider seam allowance is gonna be nicer this time. So I'm gonna kind of flip the hem along the whole thing just so it gets kind of in the groove of knowing where it's going to be for the rest of its life. And then you're going to have to combat the rolling as you go. And you're going to lift your needles up, feed it in there, just beyond the seam. Press your foot down. Here we go. Looking at all that rolling under there. I really want it to behave. All right, it's pretty quick. Nice little cap sleeves. Once I get that rolling flat, kind of push it on the bed of the machine to keep it that way. I'm getting close to this beginning here. I'm going to get rid of these threads here so that I don't immortalize them. I'm not going to clip that. That's where I secured my serging threads. All do a few extra stitches, pull up my needles, release it. And I got a little bit off right there. My serger's not doing so good today. It has its days, right? All right, so let's do our last sleeve hem. And I'm pushing the seam allowance the same direction as I sewed it when I sewed the armhole. So it may not be to the back, depending on how you did it, but I did do it the same way. It's such a short underarm. It's good not to twist it. Alright, I get it going, and now I'm gonna get it nice and flat. Alright, we're here at the beginning. Get rid of these threads here. Sometimes I actually end up sewing a few stitches on my hem there, and I just pull them out while I'm trying to release it. There we go. We just need our hem, and we'll have a quail print t-shirt. I'm going to even up my juncture. This is the front side, so I'm going to start on this seam, so I know I'm starting on the back side. Fold it up. Now you know how you could shorten any of your existing t-shirts too. Or if you have a stain on the bottom, just cut it off and rehem it. Or a rip. This is how they do it in production in a factory. They always hem on the right side. It's just how it always has been done. No idea why they just don't flip it over to for the sewing. This is not to be confused with flat locking or flat stitching or flat seaming. Same exact thing, all three of those things I just said. But a lot of people do confuse the two, and it's a completely different function, because that is generally when you're using a machine to seam something together with no seam allowances like this. So it lays flat against the body, so there's hardly any seams poking into your body. Think wetsuits and things like that in some active wear. In most cases, it's to reduce on abrasion resistance. Or it's supposed to increase abrasion resistance and decrease abrasion. But sometimes the threads can be kind of pokey too. So you got to be careful where you put it. All right, we are almost done. This rolly hem, I can't wait to have it secured so it's not rolling anymore. I still needed to help it over the seam there. I do feel like I'm doing a little bit wider of a hem right now because of the rolling. I'd rather the hem lose about 1/4 or 1/8 or 1/4 of an inch in the hem, or the overall length, and add it to the hem, and then just trim off this little rolled edge. And I'll show you what I mean in a second. Alright, we're almost to the beginning here. Cut our threads. It's our last ones. Alright. There we go. So you see right here I did a little bit longer because of this rolling was a little bit hard to combat. So I can now go here very carefully, trim this little bit of an edge. You don't have to. This wide I would. It could be a nicer hem. But the goal is to have that cut edge caught in the seam. I don't have any good examples on this. Maybe we'll have better luck on our blue one. This fabric is a lot thinner than the blue and rollier. All right, get the idea. So we have our little quail print t-shirt, and you can stay tuned. I'll show you a picture of both of them on. All right, let's make a boxy tee with the drop shoulder next. All right, next up is our dropped shoulder t-shirt, and I have this hemp cotton spandex blend in a solid, so it's pretty simple, and it's pretty easy for me to tell the right and wrong side of this fabric, thankfully, but it does have a nice texture with the hemp being in there. So we're going to start with the shoulders again, and again I'm going to do my little trick of keeping the right side of the stitching on the fronts, so that I can tell when I'm, sewing the sleeves in, that I can tell which one's the front, so I can push the seam the right direction. Just makes it easier so I'm not searching around on the garment when I'm lost in the armhole. All right, let's see here. This t-shirt is similarly sewn to the scoop neck that we just made. However, it does have a neckband. So even though it has the drop shoulder with the flatter cap of the sleeve, as opposed to the scoop neck, has a higher cap, more of a shape. So the sewing is exactly the same steps. I'm going to do the side seams. I'm going to line it up with the armhole. And I will be going down one side of one side seam and then going up on the other side. Usually on long vertical seams, I like to go the same direction on both. So if I start at the armhole on one, I start at the armhole on the other. But I am trying to keep the right side of the stitching on the fronts just for ease later on. And I usually do that mainly when I try to keep the stitching going the same direction. I do that so that if there's any kind of stretch or slippage or anything like that happening, it's symmetrical. And I'm dealing with the exact same thing on both. Alright, next we're going to do our sleeves after this one last side seam. I usually get going, like I say, and then I arrange the rest of the seam. Trim right, so now we have our fronts to our backs at the shoulders and the sides. Maybe you can see the stitching a little better on this one. That's the right side, and this is the wrong side. So the side looks a little nicer. Even if you like one, you know, if you think they look the same, or you like them both the same, just pick one, and then that way you always know, oh, when I see this stitching, this is the front, and I'm going to push my seam towards the back with that up. All right, so let's do our underarms of our sleeves. Right sides together. And you see this cap is a lot flatter than the scoop neck. Kind of hard to see there, but it's a little flatter. It's because the shoulder drops of the armhole on the body. Now we have that same hem shape at the bottom. Oops. This little piece of thread or fabric here, I'm gonna push it. There we go. So like I say, when you get to these little shapes here, just do the best you can. Your blade's pretty far in front of where your needles are at. And they're both really important, but that blade, you know, there's no going back from that blade. Gotta watch it. All right. I never use pins with my knits. It's really rare. Maybe if I was putting on a skirt that's gathered up and I'm really needing to distribute the gathers. Okay, so we're going to turn our sleeve right side out. Leave our body of our shirt inside out. My sleeves are symmetrical, so it doesn't matter that there's not a front or a back to the sleeve, so I can use either one for the step for either armhole. So now I stick my sleeve inside the armhole, line up the underarm seams. I always start at the bottom with the underarm seams. Okay. So remember, I know that that's my nice side of my stitching, so that's going to push towards the back of the garment. And then I'm going to push my underarm of my sleeve towards the front just to reduce the bulk there. Now, if I were using an industrial serger, I wouldn't really have to worry about that. And my serger could sew that. It's just, I really like the flatter feel of this seam. And I just need to remember that when I go to sew my hems of my sleeve that I did that. Kind of get it going. And see, this is a perfect example. When I'm up here, I know that this is the back of the garment because that stitching looks nice. I'm all about trying to make things more efficient. I feel like the faster things are, the more likely I am to start that project, you know. I know it's not going to take forever. I like efficiency. And like I've said before, it's good to know the feel of the garment underneath your fingers so you can tell when the garment is kind of creeping under the presser foot. Line it up with the original, clip the threads, and then I just kind of pull to kind of secure them. All right, let's do our other sleeve. These are really fast to sew. You know, it's the same with a sweatshirt. The only difference there is you don't have to do hems. You do a waistband and cuffs. Okay. Make sure I got the cap of the sleeve. Yep, there we go. Stick it inside the garment. Line up the side seam. Push the seam to the back on the body and the sleeve towards the front. It's always nice to have t-shirts that fit you. Even though this is more of like a jersey knit, it does have a lot more stretch than a usual jersey knit, which is kind of nice. Most jerseys don't stretch as much as, like, say, an interlock. Coming around to the beginning, and I'm going to line up to where I began. Smooth out that join. Let's get rid of this little piece of fabric here. There we go. Now we are ready for the neckband. So here is our neckline here. I did kind of a not as traditional. All right, so you're going to sew your neckband into a circle. And typically you do need to ease your neckband a little bit. So fold your neckband along the length. And let's see, let's give ourselves a little guide. I like to line up my center of my neckband seam to the shoulder rather than the center back. And that's just to hold that seam or kind of keep it away from the center. It just looks a little nicer, it blends in a little better. So I'm gonna notch my neckband a tiny little bit. I made it really obvious so you can see it too. I made a little V. And now I'm going to find where the middle of my neckband, of my neckline is in relation to the shoulder. Because it's not going to be the other shoulder. It's going to be somewhere else. So let's see here. It's going to be right about here. So now I put the seam on this one over here. And funny enough, sometimes some sergers will naturally push a certain way. Most of the time they push so that the bad side of the stitching is showing better, but it won't matter on this neckband. But mine does like to kind of push towards the back a little bit, or to the, with the nice side showing. All right, so I'm gonna line this up. So now I keep my shoulder seam pressed the same way. It's going to be tempting to use pins on this because it is kind of a lot of layers to sew. So I'm going to get it going and then straighten it all out. All right, so now we've got our work under the needle here. I'm going to fold it, line up my center right there, find the center that I marked right here, just like that. And then you can kind of see where you need to ease it in. So I'll kind of look where the halfway point is between these two and kind of hold them just like this as my next guide, just like that. This is kind of a similar thing how you would do a cuff. Cuffs can be a little different though because it's a really small little area. All right. All right, I'm getting closer to my little halfway point here. I'm gonna line them all up just like this. Okay. So I am pulling the neckband a little bit. It is slightly smaller than the seam that it's sewing to. That's so that it lays flat. And what you need to know is when you do need to pull things like that, make sure you're not pulling on them as they're under the needle. You don't want to bend your needle. You don't want to accidentally pull on your needles as you're sewing. It's really important. Because sometimes you can get really caught up with trying to keep track of where everything's at and forget. All right, so I'm gonna kind of find this halfway point here. Maybe I'll do it after I get to this center point here. It'll be less finicky that way. Sometimes you use rib instead of self, which self means the fabric of the body. And rib is a little bit stretchier. You always cross-cut your neckband or your cuffs or your waistband. You don't cut them on the length grain. So even though I am pulling the neckband a little bit, it's really not much, not for this amount. This distance makes it pretty easy to ease that in there. Now we have our neckband. Let's see how our shirt looks. All right. There we go. Looks pretty good. Now you can do the detail where you top stitch down your serging, but you need to use a stretch stitch or a cover stitch. All right, so next is our hems. Let me convert my machine to the cover stitch. Okay, we're back to hem our boxy t-shirt. I converted my machine to a cover stitch, and a cover stitch is basically a twin needle hem on the outside, and it looks like serging on the inside, but you don't trim anything off. So this is what it looks like on the inside, and this is what it looks like on the outside. You can see I did this little sample on a piece of fabric, and this is going the length grain, so one of the stitches kind of get buried in the pattern. So you do this on the right side of the garment. It's a little tricky, and it kind of feels kind of like you're sewing blind, but you do get the hang of it. All right, so first thing I do is I look at my seam junctures because I will be going over those. I'm gonna get rid of these threads here. And I make sure there's no like little points sticking out because we're going to be sewing those onto the shirt, and when they're turned up and poking above the seam, then they just won't get caught inside. Let's get rid of some of these threads here. And let's look at the way our sleeve is turned. All right, there we go. So you're going to turn up your sleeve. And I'm actually going to turn my shirt inside out so that I can sew this without the shirt being underneath my sewing. So here we go. So I'm going to sew from the inside of the sleeve. So again, I'm sewing on the right side of the garment. See, there's my seam. But I've got the garment inside out, and that's so that I don't catch the garment underneath the needle. There we go. All right, so for mine, I need to lift up the needles a little bit and kind of get it in there. The first few stitches don't look the greatest. I never start on the seam. I start just behind it so that I can approach the seam. As I'm sewing, I can approach it rather than start on top of it. Kind of get my sewing legs under me, like I like to say. All right, so we're going to start. I'm going to lift up my presser foot when it gets to that juncture. And I'm going to help my machine a little bit because sometimes your machine really hates these junctures in the cover stitch. And if you don't help it along, it might get hung up there and kind of do a few stitches in place. So I'm feeling for the edge that I've got turned under here, feeling for that, and I want my left needle to be on the left side of that. You're not centering that cut edge there, you're lining up the cut edge with the needle. Alright, so I'm getting to the beginning. You can see this little messy beginning here, so I'm going to trim all this off first before I approach it. Get rid of it. Might as well. You're going to be trimming it off anyway. You might as well make it do it while it's easy. And so you're going to want to try and line up best you can with your start. There's no back stitch. So just do a few extra stitches, pull up your needles, and I try and pull my work out as far as I can away, and I may have to sew a few stitches to get it to release, just like that. But as it is a serger, you can stitch without fabric under the needle. There we go. Not bad for my first one. It's not something I do every day, so I do feel like I always have to get reacquainted with it. Alright, so let's do our other one here. So again, I'm going to kind of look at my start stop there and kind of smooth this out right here. Sewing from the inside of the garment, but on the right side. Don't think too hard about it. I like to kind of get the whole sleeve hem turned up and ready to go, so that it's about the same width all the way around. It wants to fold right there where that hem shape was that we saw when we sewed the side seam. All right, so let's get it under there. I'm raising my needles up as high as I can, kind of pushing it under there a little bit, and let the fabric go back together. Like, don't keep it stretched out while you do that. All right, put my presser foot down. I'm gonna start sewing. It's doing really good over the seam thicknesses today. And I'm feeling for that cut edge right there and putting it just to the right of the left-hand needle. And that left-hand needle is just off the edge of that cut edge right there. You see that? All right, so we're getting here. Let me just trim this off while I'm looking at it. See, there's what I'm talking about, that little edge sticking up right there. I'm going to trim it off. You don't really have to. And chances are the first few times you do cover stitch, you will have some of the fabric sticking above that edge, and it's okay. If you look at some of your store-bought stuff, it's like that too. Alright, so I just line it up best I can with the original starting, lift up my presser foot, pull out as much as I can, sew a few stitches to get it out of there, and then I just cut it. Now, if you like, and some machines may require this, you can put this in your regular machine and backstitch right there, but they don't do that in the industry. They may do it on seams that they sewed a little differently though. Alright, so let's do the overall hem. I try and start on the back, and you'll see while I was converting my machine, I put in a little piece of ribbon at my back neck, so I always know that's the back of my garment. I don't have labels. Alright, so this is the front of my shirt, this is the back of my shirt. I'm going to turn it inside out. I'm going to push my seam towards the back. I'm also going to look at all these junctures right here. Smooth them out a little bit. Might as well do it now. There's my other one. Just check it as well. Here it is right here. Okay. All right. And we know, because of the way we sewed our seams with the nice stitching on the front side, that this must be the front because we're pressing the seam that way, because we can see that nice serging. Okay, it's about 3/4 inch hem. I'm going to kind of get my sewing legs under me on this one because it's much longer than the sleeve, and then I'll rearrange. So let's lift up the needles. Put it in there a little bit. I kind of stretch it to get it under there just because I'm pulling, but then I let go, relax it. Put the presser foot down, and then I get going. Now, one thing to try and keep straight is your hem, just straight up and down. Don't let it do this. Don't let it torque. Try and keep it straight up and down like this. Try not to pull your hem as well. My fabric's pretty stretchy, so it would be really easy to pull on it. All right, I know I'm approaching this side seam. That seam goes towards the back. Turn it up, get it ready. Keeping it as relaxed as possible. All right, here's that seam juncture. So as I approach it, I'm going to be a little bit cautious and I'm going to help it along. That one I might be able to show you what my machine will do if it gets a little hung up. When you have a machine that does a few different things, sometimes it doesn't do each of those things to the best. But it does all of them pretty good. You do not need to hem your things with a cover stitch either. It's just kind of a nice touch to make your garments look professional. And I needed it when I used to do a lot of prototyping for patterns I drafted in the garment industry. And more they're becoming standard on some sergers. All right, so here's my beginning. I'm just gonna trim up these threads here. It's only 3 threads for a cover stitch. But you can see that doesn't look that good. You know, it's okay. And if you wanted to hem your knits on a regular machine, you can do that with a zigzag. I know you probably don't want to because you think it doesn't look as professional, but trust me, it'll be great. It really will. I do it too. Sometimes I just don't want to convert my machine to the cover stitch. It only takes a couple minutes, but you know. So here you can see where I didn't catch some of the fabric there. You can trim it off or just leave it. There's a few places that I did that. And let's see if how this, that went a little better than I was picturing, but you can see as I approached it, it got a little hung up, and kind of as I pushed, it kind of went over its little speed bump. But our shirt's done. And it looks like a kind of a classic boxy tee, but more of a, has a little bit more of a shape and silhouette. I'm going to think about whether I want to top stitch my neckline or cover stitch it, but you could cover stitch it, just straddle the needle right over this, the ribbing and the body, just center it. Or you can put both of them on this side as long as your needles are the right width apart. Mine might be a little wide for this, but I might try it out. I kind of like the soft look personally, but I might try it just for an experiment. It stretched out my neckband a little bit when I put that ribbon on there, but when it washes, it'll be fine. At least I know the back every time I put it on. So there we go. There's your boxy tee. Just like a classic t-shirt. Put a pocket on there as well. Just make sure you use a ballpoint needle if you put a pocket on there, because you definitely need to be really careful with knits and a regular sewing machine. Use a ballpoint needle. All right. Thanks so much. I hope you enjoy, and the pattern videos will be linked in the description just in case you'd like to try and draft your own, maybe with a pattern that you already have on hand, or maybe you want to alter it a little bit. Check out those pattern tutorials and let me know what you think. I'm live twice weekly, Thursdays and Saturdays, and we'd love to have you. So thanks so much. Bye.